There is a breath moving through you right now. Not the breath you control, but the breath that breathes itself. Feel it. The rise and fall of your chest, the subtle expansion of your ribs, the way air enters without permission and leaves without asking. This breath has been with you since before you had a name, before you learned to call yourself I. And in this moment, something is listening. Not your thoughts, they are merely passing clouds. Not your emotions, they rise and dissolve like waves. Something deeper. Something that has been watching your entire life unfold, silent and patient, waiting for you to notice it has been there all along. What if everything you believe about yourself is a carefully constructed fiction? Not a lie exactly, but a story so convincing you forgot it was invented. What if the person you present to the world, the identity you defend with such vigilance, is nothing more than a mask you've worn so long it has fused to your skin? This is not philosophy for its own sake. This is an invitation to look directly at the architecture of your suffering. And if you're willing to stay here, to move past the comfortable narratives and into the territory where transformation actually lives, then subscribe now. Not because I ask, but because something in you recognizes this threshold. You've been circling it for years. The question is not whether you're ready. The question is whether you're exhausted enough with the pretense to finally stop performing. Before language, there was only sensation. The infant knows warmth and cold, comfort and distress, presence and absence. No concepts yet. No self to defend. Just pure, unfiltered experience moving through a nervous system that hasn't learned to lie. Then something shifts. The child reaches for something and a hand pulls away. The child cries and a face hardens. The child laughs too loud and the room goes silent. In these micro moments, invisible and profound, the architecture of identity begins its construction. Not through grand decisions, but through 1,000 tiny calibrations. Asterisk, this expression brings connection. That one brings isolation. This part of me is welcomed. That part creates danger. Asterisk, your nervous system, brilliant and adaptive, begins mapping the terrain of acceptability. It learns which emotions are safe to display and which must be hidden, which desires can be spoken and which must be buried, which aspects of your nature will be met with warmth and which will be met with the cold withdrawal of love. This is not pathology. This is survival. The young self, still forming, still soft, makes an unconscious bargain. Asterisk, I will become what keeps me safe. I will exile what threatens my belonging. Asterisk, and so the persona begins to crystallize. What Carl Jung called the mask we show to the world, the carefully curated presentation of acceptability. But here is what no one tells you. The persona is not evil. It is not a mistake. It saved you. When you were small and powerless, when your survival depended on the approval of giants, this adaptive mask was your shield. The compliant child who learned to suppress rage. The achieving adolescent who learned to hide vulnerability. The competent adult who learned to bury need. Each adaptation made perfect sense in its moment. Yet something else was happening in those formative years, something darker and more consequential. For every quality you learned to display, another was pushed into shadow. The anger that wasn't allowed became a silent rage fermenting in your cells. The desire that was shamed became a hunger you could no longer name. The wildness that was tamed became a caged animal pacing in the basement of your psyche. These rejected parts didn't disappear. They couldn't. Energy doesn't vanish, it transforms. What was too raw, too demanding, too honest for the world you inhabited, it sank. Down into the unmarked territory Jung called the shadow, the repository of everything you decided you are not. Consider the child who expressed anger and watched their caregiver's face turn to stone. The message received: anger makes me unlovable, so anger goes underground. It doesn't dissolve. It metastasizes into passive aggression, into chronic tension held in the jaw, into sudden explosions that seem to come from nowhere. The adult wonders why they can't set boundaries, why they say yes when they mean no, why resentment builds like pressure in a sealed container. Or the child whose enthusiasm was met with mockery, whose joy was too loud, too much, too inconvenient. The lesson learned: my aliveness is a burden, so aliveness gets muted, dampened. The adult moves through life in grayscale, wondering why nothing feels vibrant anymore, why passion seems like a foreign language, why they watch others live with an intensity they can only observe from behind glass. These are not abstract examples. These are the blueprints of your suffering. The persona you constructed, competent, controlled, acceptable, it worked. For years, perhaps decades, it worked. You learned to navigate social hierarchies, to maintain relationships, to function in a world that rewards conformity and punishes deviation. You became skilled at reading rooms, at modulating your expression, at presenting the version of yourself most likely to be received without friction. But somewhere along the way, the mask that once protected you became a prison. The persona that saved you began to suffocate you. What was once adaptive became constrictive. The very mechanisms that ensured your survival now prevent your aliveness. You can feel it, can't you? The weight of constant self-monitoring. The exhaustion of maintaining an image. The sense that you are performing your own life rather than living it. There is a grinding fatigue beneath the surface, a low-grade anxiety that has become so familiar you've stopped questioning it. You call it normal. You call it just how life is. But your body knows differently. Your body holds the truth your mind has learned to deny. The tension in your shoulders is not random. It is the weight of carrying a false self. The knot in your stomach is not anxiety without cause. It is the protest of your authentic nature demanding recognition. The insomnia, the restlessness, the vague sense of wrongness that follows you through your days. These are not pathologies to be medicated away. They are intelligent signals from the parts of you that refuse to stay buried. And you are beginning to feel the difference between the life you are living and the life that wants to live through you. This recognition, this moment when the persona begins to feel less like protection and more like confinement, this is where the real work begins. Not the work of building a better mask, but the work of removing it entirely. Not the work of transcending your humanity, but the work of reclaiming it. The shadow is calling. It has been calling for years. And whether you answer with courage or continue to run with increasing desperation, that choice is arriving now, in this moment, as you listen to these words and feel something ancient stirring in the depths of your being. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical exertion. It is the weariness of vigilance, the fatigue of constant self-editing, the grinding depletion that comes from living at a distance from your own truth. You wake already tired. You move through your day with a low hum of tension that has become so constant you barely notice it anymore. Until you do. The body keeps score, as they say. But it's more than that. The body is not merely recording trauma. It is actively protesting the betrayal of your authentic nature. Every suppressed emotion, every denied impulse, every moment you chose safety over honesty, your organism remembers. And it responds. The tension in your jaw is not incidental. It is the physical manifestation of words you've swallowed for years. The tightness in your chest is not mysterious. It is grief that was never allowed to move through you. The chronic pain in your lower back, the digestive issues that doctors can't quite explain, the autoimmune conditions that seem to arise from nowhere. These are not random malfunctions. They are the body's last resort, the final attempt to get your attention when all other signals have been ignored. And then there are the psychological symptoms, the ones we've been taught to pathologize and medicate. The anxiety that seems to have no clear object, the depression that descends without apparent reason, the sense of profound inadequacy that persists despite external success. We call these disorders. We treat them as malfunctions of brain chemistry, as problems to be solved with the right combination of pharmaceuticals and cognitive restructuring. But what if they are not malfunctions at all? What if they are messengers? Anxiety, in its essence, is energy-seeking expression. It is the life force that has been dammed up, the authentic impulses that have been blocked, now manifesting as free-floating dread. When you cannot express anger directly, it becomes anxiety. When you cannot acknowledge desire, it becomes restlessness. When you cannot grieve what you've lost, including the loss of your own authentic self, it becomes a generalized sense of impending doom. Depression, similarly, is not merely a chemical imbalance. It is what happens when the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be becomes unbearable. It is the psyche's way of forcing a shutdown, of saying, *I cannot continue this performance. Something must change. *, the flatness, the numbness, the inability to feel joy. These are not failures of your neurotransmitters. They are the natural consequence of living a life that is not yours. Consider how you move through the world. How much of your day is spent calculating the right response, the appropriate emotion, the acceptable opinion? How often do you speak and hear your own voice as if from a distance, wondering who is actually talking? How frequently do you find yourself in situations where you smile while something inside you screams? This is the exhaustion of the persona. This is the cost of the constructed self. Now we arrive at the paradox, the truth that will either liberate you or send you running back to the familiar prison of your carefully managed life. The very qualities you rejected often contain your deepest power. The aspects of yourself you exiled to the shadow are not your weaknesses. They are your unrealized strengths, distorted by denial and neglect. The rage you learned to suppress? It contains your capacity for necessary boundaries, your ability to say no, your power to protect what matters. Without access to this force, you become a doormat, endlessly accommodating, silently resentful, wondering why people take advantage of your kindness. The greed you were taught to shame. It holds your will to live, your hunger for experience, your refusal to settle for less than what your soul demands. Without this appetite, you become passive, resigned, watching life happen to others while you wait for permission to want something fully. The desire you repressed because it was too intense, too sexual, too raw. It contains your creative fire, your passion, your capacity for deep connection. Without it, you move through relationships like a ghost, present but not really there, wondering why intimacy feels like a performance rather than a revelation. But here is what makes this so difficult. You cannot simply decide to reclaim these parts. You cannot think your way into integration, because the shadow operates below the level of conscious awareness, in the realm of projection and unconscious reaction. You don't see your shadow directly. You see it reflected in the world around you, in the people you judge with particular venom, in the qualities you despise with disproportionate intensity. Pay attention to your judgments. They are maps to your shadow. When you encounter someone whose confidence reads as arrogance, and you feel a surge of contempt, pause. What you are witnessing is not merely their behavior. You are witnessing your own disowned confidence, the self-assurance you learned to suppress because it was labeled as pride or selfishness. The intensity of your reaction is proportional to the degree of your own denial. When you see someone expressing anger freely, and you feel disgust or fear, notice. You are not simply observing their emotion. You are confronting your own forbidden rage, the force you've kept locked away because you were taught that anger makes you dangerous or unlovable. Your judgment is a defense mechanism, a way of maintaining the distance between yourself and what you've rejected. When you watch someone pursue their desires unapologetically, and you feel a mix of envy and moral superiority, recognize. You are not witnessing their greed or selfishness. You are seeing your own hunger, the wanting you've starved because you learned that desire is shameful or that your needs are too much. Your criticism is a prison guard, keeping your own appetite safely contained. This is the mechanism of projection, and it is operating in your life constantly, invisibly, shaping your relationships and your reality without your conscious participation. Every person you hate, every quality you judge with particular ferocity, every weakness you despise in others, you are looking at your own shadow in a mirror. And until you recognize this, until you can see that your external world is reflecting your internal fragmentation, you will remain trapped in the cycle of judgment and denial. The discomfort you feel right now, if you're truly listening, is not intellectual. It is visceral. It is the sensation of something pressing against the walls of your carefully constructed identity, demanding recognition. It is the shadow, no longer content to remain hidden, beginning to make itself known through symptoms you can no longer ignore. You cannot maintain this anymore. The cost has become too high. The persona that once served you is now consuming you, and somewhere in the depths of your being, you know this. You know that something must change, that you cannot continue to live at this distance from yourself, that the anxiety and depression and chronic dissatisfaction are not problems to be managed but signals to be heeded. The question is not whether the shadow exists. It does. The question is whether you have the courage to turn toward it, to meet what you've been running from, to reclaim what you've spent a lifetime denying. Because the alternative, continuing to live as a fraction of yourself, maintaining the exhausting performance of the acceptable self, is a form of slow death. And you are beginning to feel the urgency of this choice. Not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality pressing against your chest, making it harder to breathe, harder to pretend, harder to continue the charade. What if the answer lives in what you've been running from? What if the very thing you fear most about yourself is the doorway to your liberation? What if the shadow, far from being your enemy, is actually the lost part of your soul waiting to come home? This is where most people turn back. This is where the comfortable narratives of self-improvement and positive thinking offer an escape route. Focus on the light, they say. Transcend the darkness. But this is spiritual bypassing, a sophisticated form of denial. Because you cannot transcend what you have not integrated. You cannot rise above what you have not first descended into and claimed as your own. The shadow is not absent. It is not gone. It is fermenting in the dark, pressing against the walls of your carefully constructed life, leaking out in ways you don't recognize. In your dreams, in your compulsions, in your inexplicable reactions, in the patterns that repeat despite your best intentions. It is there, in the basement of your psyche, growing more powerful the longer you refuse to acknowledge it. And it is calling you now, not with words, but with symptoms, with the breakdown of the persona, with the increasing impossibility of maintaining the false self, with the growing sense that you are standing at a threshold, and the only way forward is through the very territory you've spent your life avoiding. There is a place within you that you have never fully entered. Not a metaphorical place, but an actual territory of your psyche that exists right now, in this moment, beneath the surface of your conscious awareness. It is not somewhere you need to travel to. It is here. It has always been here. You have simply learned to look away. Stop looking away. Recognize, in this moment, that there is a presence within you that is not the voice in your head. Not the narrator of your thoughts, not the judge of your experience, but something older, something that existed before you learned language, before you constructed an identity. This presence has been watching your entire life unfold. It has witnessed every adaptation, every suppression, every moment you chose safety over truth. And it knows where the shadow lives. The shadow wears a face, sometimes many faces. It holds a voice, though you have forbidden it to speak. It carries emotions so intense, so raw, so unacceptable that you learn to pretend they don't exist. But they do exist. They are as real as your breath, as present as your heartbeat, as undeniable as the tension you carry in your body. Let us name them, not to pathologize, but to recognize. Not to judge, but to see clearly. Rage, not anger, that domesticated emotion we're allowed to feel in measured doses. Rage, the primal, destructive force that wants to tear down, to burn, to annihilate what constrains it. You learn to call this inappropriate. You learn to transmute it into passive aggression or swallow it entirely. But it is there, coiled in your belly, waiting. Greed, not ambition, that socially acceptable desire for achievement. Greed, the insatiable hunger that wants more, always more, that refuses to be satisfied, that consumes without apology. You learn to call this selfish. You learn to perform contentment while your soul starved. But the hunger remains, gnawing at you in the dark. Lust, not desire, that polite word for attraction. Lust, the raw, animal wanting that cares nothing for propriety, that demands satisfaction, that sees bodies as objects of pleasure without the veneer of romance. You learn to call this shameful. You learn to dress it up in acceptable narratives. But the wanting persists, pulsing beneath your civilized exterior. Despair, not sadness, that emotion we're allowed to feel temporarily. Despair, the bottomless grief, the existential horror, the sense that nothing matters and everything is futile. You learn to call this depression and medicate it away. You learn to stay busy, to stay positive, to never look directly at the void. But it is there, beneath everything, waiting for you to stop running. Shame, not embarrassment, that fleeting discomfort. Shame, the bone-deep conviction that you are fundamentally wrong, irredeemably flawed, unworthy of love or belonging. You learn to compensate with achievement, with people-pleasing, with constant self-improvement. But the shame remains, the original wound that all your adaptations were designed to hide. These are not abstractions. These are living forces within you, archetypal energies that have been operating in your psyche since before you had words for them. And every single one of them, in its distorted form, is causing suffering in your life right now. But here is what changes everything. These forces, in their essential nature, are not pathological. They are not evidence of your brokenness. They are aspects of your humanity that have been rejected, denied, and therefore twisted into their shadow forms. And they contain, within them, the very qualities you need to become whole. The rage you fear? It is the guardian of your boundaries. It is the force that says no when something violates your integrity. It is the power that protects what is sacred to you. Without access to this energy, you become endlessly accommodating, unable to defend yourself, wondering why you feel like a victim in your own life. The rage is not the problem. The problem is that you've never learned to channel it consciously, to use it as fuel for necessary action, rather than letting it leak out in destructive ways. The greed you shame? It is your will to live, your refusal to settle, your hunger for experience and growth. It is the force that drives you to claim your place in the world, to take up space, to demand what you need. Without this appetite, you become passive, resigned, waiting for life to happen to you rather than actively creating it. The greed is not the problem. The problem is that you've never learned to honor your hunger, to feed yourself fully rather than starving in the name of virtue. The lust you repress? It is your creative fire, your passion, your capacity for deep embodiment and connection. It is the energy that moves through you when you are fully alive, fully present, fully engaged with existence. Without this force, you become disembodied, disconnected, moving through life like a ghost. The lust is not the problem. The problem is that you've never learned to integrate your sexuality with your spirituality, to honor the body as sacred, rather than treating it as an obstacle to transcendence. Every person you judge with particular intensity is showing you a disowned part of yourself. This is not theory. This is mechanism. Pay attention. Think of someone in your life, or in the public sphere, who triggers you with their confidence. Someone whose self-assurance reads as arrogance, whose certainty feels like narcissism. Notice the intensity of your reaction. That intensity is not about them. It is about you. Specifically, it is about the confidence you learned to suppress, the self-assurance you were taught to call pride, the certainty you decided was dangerous. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where standing out was punished, where expressing confidence was met with cutting remarks designed to keep you humble. So you learned to make yourself small, to downplay your abilities, to apologize for taking up space. And now, when you encounter someone who hasn't learned this lesson, who moves through the world with unapologetic self-assurance, you feel contempt. You call them arrogant. You judge them as narcissistic. But what you are really experiencing is envy. Not the petty envy of wanting what they have, but the deeper envy of recognizing a freedom you denied yourself. They are living with a quality you exiled to your shadow, and your judgment is the mechanism that keeps you from reclaiming it. Or consider someone who expresses anger freely, who doesn't apologize for their rage, who sets boundaries without guilt. If you feel fear or disgust in their presence, if you find yourself thinking they're so aggressive, or they have anger issues, pause. What you are witnessing is not their pathology, but your own forbidden emotion. You learned that anger makes you unlovable, that rage is dangerous, that you must always be calm and controlled. So you buried your own fire. And now, when you see someone who hasn't buried theirs, you feel threatened. You judge them. You create distance. But what you are really doing is maintaining the prison you built for yourself. Your judgment of their anger is the lock on your own cage. This is the revelation that changes everything. Your external world is a mirror of your internal fragmentation. Every judgment, every strong reaction, every person you cannot stand, they are showing you the map of your shadow. They are revealing what you have rejected in yourself. And until you can see this, until you can recognize that your hatred of others is actually self-hatred projected outward, you will remain trapped in the cycle of denial and suffering. The work, then, is not to become a better person. It is not to transcend your darkness or rise above your shadow. The work is to turn toward what you have been running from, to meet the disowned parts with curiosity rather than judgment, to recognize that these rejected aspects are not your enemies. They are lost children of your psyche, waiting to be welcomed home. Imagine, recognize, that there is a room within you that you have kept locked. Behind that door are all the parts of yourself you decided were unacceptable. The rage, the hunger, the desire, the grief, the shame. You have spent your life standing guard at that door, using enormous amounts of energy to keep it sealed, terrified of what might happen if you let those forces out. But what if you stopped guarding the door? What if, instead of keeping these parts locked away, you opened the door and invited them in? Not to let them run wild, not to act out every impulse, but to acknowledge their existence, to listen to what they have to say, to integrate them into your conscious awareness. This is the invitation to integration. Not transcendence, not spiritual bypassing, not the false light of positive thinking, but the genuine work of becoming whole by reclaiming what you have rejected. The rage you denied holds your necessary boundaries. Let it speak. What does it want to protect? What violations has it been trying to alert you to? What has it been trying to help you say? The greed you shamed contains your will to live. Let it emerge. What does it hunger for? What experiences has it been trying to pull you toward? What fullness has it been trying to help you claim? The desire you repressed holds your authentic passion. Let it breathe. What does it want to create? What connections has it been trying to forge? What aliveness has it been trying to restore? This is not about indulging every impulse. This is about bringing unconscious forces into conscious awareness, so they can be integrated rather than acted out. Because here is the paradox. The shadow only controls you when you deny it. The rage only destroys when you pretend it doesn't exist. The hunger only consumes when you refuse to feed it consciously. The desire only becomes compulsive when you repress it entirely. Integration is not about letting the shadow run your life. It is about recognizing that the shadow is already running your life, through your symptoms, through your projections, through your unconscious reactions. The work is to bring it into the light, to see it clearly, to reclaim its energy and redirect it toward conscious purposes. What if, instead of fighting these parts, instead of trying to transcend them, you finally let them come home? What if you stopped performing the role of the acceptable self and allowed yourself to be fully human, which means fully complex, fully contradictory, fully alive? This is the threshold. This is the moment of choice. You can turn back now, return to the familiar prison of the persona, continue the exhausting performance of the false self. Or you can step forward, into the territory you've been avoiding, and meet what has been waiting for you in the darkness. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the lost part of your soul. And it is time to bring it home. What if, in this moment, you simply stopped? Stop defending. Stop managing. Stop maintaining the elaborate story of who you are supposed to be. What if you let the whole construction collapse, just for an instant, and discovered what remains when the persona dissolves? There is a relief in surrender that cannot be described, only experienced. It is not the relief of giving up, but the relief of putting down a burden you never needed to carry. The burden of being someone. The burden of maintaining an identity. The burden of defending a self that was never real to begin with. Feel it now. The weight of constant self-monitoring. The exhaustion of managing your image. The vigilance required to maintain the boundaries of who you think you are. What if you simply let it go? Not as a concept, not as a spiritual idea, but as an actual physical release. Like ice finally returning to water. Like a clenched fist opening. Like a held breath finally exhaling. The boundaries of the self begin to soften. Not as pathology, but as freedom. The rigid edges that separate me from not me start to blur. And in that blurring, something vast begins to reveal itself. Something that was always there, hidden beneath the noise of your thoughts and the drama of your emotions. There are thoughts arising. Can you notice them? Not the content of the thoughts, but the fact that they are arising. Appearing in awareness like clouds appearing in sky. There is a thought about yourself. There is a thought about this moment. There is a thought about what comes next. But who is noticing the thoughts? There are emotions moving through you. Perhaps anxiety. Perhaps curiosity. Perhaps resistance. Can you feel them? Not as problems to solve, but as sensations moving through the body. A tightness in the chest. A flutter in the stomach. A warmth or a coldness. But who is feeling the emotions? There is the witness. The awareness that observes thoughts and emotions but is not them. The consciousness that has been present your entire life, unchanging, watching everything arise and dissolve. You have been so identified with the content of your experience, the thoughts, the emotions, the sensations, that you forgot about the space in which they appear. And you are that space. Not the thoughts, not the emotions, not the body, not the persona, not even the shadow. You are the awareness in which all of these phenomena arise. You are the sky, not the clouds. The ocean, not the waves. The screen on which the movie plays, not the characters in the story. This is not a metaphor. This is direct recognition. In this moment, if you are truly present, you can feel it. The vastness. The stillness. The presence that has no name, no history, no story. It is here. It has always been here. You simply forgot to notice it because you were so busy being someone. The separate self, the I that you defend, the identity you maintain, the persona you perform. It is not who you are. It is a construction, a useful fiction, a role you play. And in this moment of dissolution, you can see it for what it is. A pattern of thoughts and emotions arising in awareness, mistaken for the totality of your being. What you are is infinitely larger than any identity you could construct. You are the field of awareness itself, boundless and unconditioned, within which all experience unfolds. The persona is just one small pattern within that field. The shadow is another pattern. But you, the real you, are the field itself. For just an instant, let yourself feel this. Not as an idea, but as a lived reality. The vastness recognizes itself. The awareness becomes aware of itself. And in that recognition, something shifts. The urgency dissolves. The fear loosens. The need to defend or maintain or become anything at all. It simply falls away. You are both infinitely small and infinitely large. Both nothing and everything. Both the drop and the ocean. The separate self, with all its concerns and anxieties and ambitions, is revealed as a temporary contraction within infinite space. Real but not ultimate. Present but not permanent. This es ego def. Not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet recognition. The constructed identity doesn't need to be destroyed. It simply needs to be seen for what it is. And in that seeing, its grip loosens. The identification breaks. You realize you are not the character in the story. You are the awareness reading the story. And here, in this space of dissolution, there is a peace that surpasses understanding. Not the peace of having solved all your problems, but the peace of recognizing that the one who has problems is itself a construction. Not the peace of transcending your humanity, but the peace of recognizing the vastness that contains your humanity. The body breathes. Did you make that happen? Or is the breath breathing itself, as it has been your entire life, without your management or control? The heart beats. Are you doing that? Or is life living itself through this form you call me? Feel the sensation of your hands, the weight of your body, the contact between your skin and whatever surface supports you. This is not abstract. This is immediate. This is here. The body is present. The awareness is present. And the story of me, the defended identity, the constructed self, it is optional. You have always been here. Not the persona, not the shadow, but the awareness that witnesses both. The presence that existed before you learned language, before you constructed an identity, before you decided who you were supposed to be. It is here now. It will be here when the body dies. It is the only thing that has never changed, the only constant in a life of constant change. And recognizing this, truly recognizing it, not as philosophy but as lived experience, everything shifts. The shadow is no longer terrifying, because you realize you are not the shadow. The persona is no longer a prison, because you realize you are not the persona. You are the space in which both arise, the awareness that contains all experience without being defined by any of it. This is the dissolution. Not the destruction of the self, but the recognition that the self you've been defending was never real to begin with. It was a useful fiction, a necessary adaptation, a role you played. But it is not who you are. It never was. And in this recognition, there is a freedom so profound it cannot be captured in words. The freedom of no longer needing to be anyone. The freedom of no longer needing to defend or maintain or improve a self that was always just a story. The freedom of resting as the awareness that you are, watching the dance of thoughts and emotions and sensations without being swept away by them. The separate self dissolves like salt in water. Not destroyed, but integrated into something larger. The boundaries that seem so solid reveal themselves as permeable, transparent, ultimately illusory. And what remains is not emptiness, but fullness. Not absence, but presence. Not nothing, but everything. You are the sky, not the clouds. The sky, and the body breathes. The heart beats. Sensations arise and dissolve. Thoughts come and go. Emotions move through like weather. And through it all, there is this, the witnessing presence, the awareness that has no name, the consciousness that simply is. You are here. You have always been here. And everything you've been seeking, the wholeness, the peace, the sense of being enough, it was never somewhere else. It was never in the future, never dependent on fixing yourself or transcending your shadow or becoming a better person. It was always here, in this moment, as the awareness that you are. The persona can relax now. It doesn't need to work so hard. The shadow can emerge from hiding. It doesn't need to be feared. Because you, the real you, are neither the persona nor the shadow. You are the vast, open awareness in which both arise, the space that contains all experience without being threatened by any of it. This is the return. Not to somewhere new, but to what has always been. Not to a future state of enlightenment, but to the present moment, where you have always been, where you will always be, where everything you've been seeking has been waiting for you to notice it. And you are here, right now, breathing, being, aware. The recognition of your true nature, the awareness that witnesses all experience, does not mean the end of your humanity. It means the beginning of living it fully, without the constant interference of the defended ego. You still have a personality. You still have preferences, quirks, patterns. You still have a shadow. But now there is space around these things. They no longer define you completely. They are weather patterns moving through the sky of your awareness, real but not ultimate, present but not permanent. Integration is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. And wholeness includes everything: the light and the dark, the acceptable and the rejected, the persona and the shadow. It means no longer exiling parts of yourself, no longer maintaining the exhausting division between who you are and who you pretend to be. The rage is welcome now, not to act out destructively, but to inform you when boundaries are being violated. It becomes a signal, not a problem. You can feel it arising, recognize what it's protecting, and choose how to respond consciously rather than suppressing it until it explodes or leaks out in passive aggression. The hunger is welcome now, not to consume compulsively, but to guide you toward what truly nourishes you. It becomes wisdom, not pathology. You can acknowledge what you want, what you need, what you desire, without shame or apology. And in that acknowledgement, the desperate quality dissolves. You can feed yourself fully, consciously, without the guilt that comes from denying your appetite. The desire is welcome now, not to chase every impulse, but to honor the life force moving through you. It becomes creative energy, not shameful compulsion. You can feel attraction, want connection, pursue pleasure without the overlay of guilt or the need to dress it up in acceptable narratives. And in that honoring, the obsessive quality transforms. Desire becomes a current you can ride rather than a wave that drowns you. This is what integration looks like in practice. You are in a meeting and someone says something that triggers your rage. In the old pattern, you would suppress it, smile politely, and carry the resentment home with you. Or you would explode inappropriately, then feel shame and confusion about your reaction. But now, with the shadow integrated, you feel the rage arising. You recognize it. You understand what it's protecting, perhaps your time, your expertise, your dignity. And from that recognition, you can respond consciously. You can set a boundary clearly, without apology, without aggression. The rage informs your action, but doesn't control it. It becomes fuel for necessary assertion, rather than a force that either destroys or gets swallowed. Or you are scrolling through social media, and you see someone living a life that triggers your envy. In the old pattern, you would judge them, call them shallow or privileged or fake, as a way of managing your own discomfort. Or you would spiral into self-criticism, comparing yourself unfavorably, feeling inadequate. But now, with the shadow integrated, you feel the envy arising. You recognize it as a signal pointing towards something you want, but have been denying yourself. Perhaps freedom, perhaps adventure, perhaps the permission to prioritize pleasure. And from that recognition, you can ask, what is this showing me about my own unlived life? What desire am I being called to honor? The envy becomes information rather than poison. Integration means you stop dividing your experience into acceptable and unacceptable. You stop performing the role of the good person, the spiritual person, the evolved person. You become simply human, which is infinitely more complex and interesting than any role you could play. You will still have difficult emotions. You will still face challenges. You will still encounter your patterns and your wounds. But now there is awareness around them. There is space. You are no longer identified with every thought and emotion that arises. You can watch them come and go like weather without being swept away. And from this space, something new becomes possible, authentic action. Not action driven by the need to maintain an image or avoid rejection. Not action motivated by unconscious shadow material. But action that arises from your true nature, from the awareness that you are aligned with what actually matters to you. You can say no without guilt because you recognize that boundaries are not selfish, they are necessary for integrity. You can say yes without resentment because you are choosing consciously, not accommodating out of fear. You can express anger without destroying because you understand it as energy, not identity. You can feel desire without shame because you recognize it as life force, not pathology. This is freedom. Not the freedom from having difficult experiences, but the freedom to have them without being defined by them. Not the freedom from having a shadow, but the freedom to integrate it consciously rather than being controlled by it unconsciously. The work continues. Integration is not a destination you arrive at and then maintain effortlessly. It is an ongoing practice of noticing when you've contracted back into identification, when you've started defending the persona again, when you've pushed something back into shadow, and then gently returning to awareness, returning to presence, returning to the recognition of what you actually are. You will forget. You will get caught in the story again. You will identify with thoughts and emotions and believe they are the totality of who you are. This is not failure. This is the human condition. The practice is simply to notice when it happens and return. Again and again, not as a discipline imposed from outside, but as a natural movement toward truth. And over time, something shifts. The identifications become less sticky, the contractions less frequent. The space around your experience becomes more stable. Not because you've transcended your humanity, but because you've learned to rest as the awareness that contains it. You begin to move through life differently. Not performing, but being. Not managing, but allowing. Not defending, but opening. And people notice. Not because you're trying to be noticed, but because authenticity has a quality that cannot be faked. It is magnetic not because it seeks attention, but because it is rare. Most people are still performing, still defending, still maintaining the persona. And when they encounter someone who has stopped, who is simply present, simply real, it creates a resonance. This is not about becoming special. This is about becoming ordinary in the deepest sense, fully human, fully present, fully alive. No longer trying to be more than you are or less than you are, but simply being what you are, awareness expressing itself through this particular form, this particular personality, this particular life. The shadow is no longer your enemy. It is part of the wholeness. The persona is no longer a prison. It is a useful tool you can pick up and put down as needed. The emotions are no longer problems to solve. They are information, energy, the movement of life through your system. And you, the awareness that you are, remain unchanged through it all. Watching, witnessing, present, not detached, but deeply engaged. Not transcendent, but fully embodied. Not above the human experience, but at the center of it, experiencing it fully without being defined by it. This is integration. This is wholeness. This is what becomes possible when you stop running from your shadow and start reclaiming it. When you stop defending your persona and start recognizing what you actually are. When you stop trying to become someone and start being the awareness that has always been here. The breath moves. The heart beats. Sensations arise. Thoughts come and go. And through it all there is this presence. Awareness. The unchanging witness of all that changes. You are here. You have always been here. And everything you've been seeking has been seeking you, waiting for you to stop running and finally come home. So here you are, still breathing, still present, still aware. Nothing has changed, and everything has changed. The world looks the same. Your life circumstances haven't magically transformed. You still have the same challenges, the same relationships, the same responsibilities. But something fundamental has shifted in how you relate to all of it. You are no longer at war with yourself. The exhausting battle between the acceptable self and the rejected self, it can finally end. Not because you've won, but because you've recognized the war was always an illusion. There was never anything to fight. There was only wholeness, temporarily fragmented by fear, waiting to be recognized and reclaimed. This is not the end of the work. This is the beginning. Integration is not a single moment of recognition, but a lifetime of practice. You will forget. You will contract back into identification. You will push parts of yourself back into shadow. And then you will remember. You will return to awareness. You will reclaim what you rejected. Again and again, in an endless spiral of forgetting and remembering, contracting and expanding, losing yourself and finding yourself. But each time you return, the return is easier. Each time you remember, the remembering is deeper. Each time you reclaim a rejected part, the wholeness becomes more stable. Not as a permanent state you achieve, but as a living reality you inhabit more and more fully. The shadow work never ends because you are always growing, always encountering new edges, always discovering new layers of what you've denied or rejected. But the relationship to the work changes. It is no longer terrifying. It is no longer something you avoid. It becomes a homecoming, a reclamation, a return to truth. And from this place of integration, from this recognition of your true nature, you can finally live. Not the half-life of the defended persona, not the shadow life of unconscious reaction, but the full life of conscious presence. You can feel everything, express authentically, relate genuinely, create freely. Not because you've become perfect, but because you've become whole. This is why therapists fear shadow work. Not because it doesn't work, but because it works too well. It doesn't keep you in therapy indefinitely, managing symptoms and adjusting medications. It doesn't maintain the comfortable fiction that you are broken and need fixing. It reveals the truth. You were never broken. You were fragmented. And fragmentation can be healed through integration, through reclaiming what was rejected, through recognizing what you actually are. The therapeutic model wants to help you cope with your shadow. Shadow work invites you to integrate it. The therapeutic model wants to manage your symptoms. Shadow work invites you to understand their message. The therapeutic model wants to make you functional within the existing structure. Shadow work invites you to question the structure itself. This is not a criticism of therapy. Therapy has its place, its value, its necessity for many people. But it is not the same as shadow work. And shadow work is not for everyone. It requires courage. It requires honesty. It requires a willingness to look at what you've been avoiding, to feel what you've been suppressing, to reclaim what you've been rejecting. But if you are here, listening to these words, feeling something stir in the depths of your being, you are ready. Not because you're special, but because you're exhausted. Exhausted with the performance. Exhausted with the pretense. Exhausted with living at a distance from your own truth. The invitation remains. Not to become someone new, but to recognize who you've always been beneath the layers of adaptation and defense. Not to transcend your humanity, but to fully inhabit it. Not to eliminate your shadow, but to integrate it consciously, so it can serve your wholeness rather than sabotage it. You are awareness itself, vast and unconditioned, temporarily expressing through this particular form, this particular personality, this particular life. The persona is not who you are. The shadow is not who you are. You are the space in which both arise, the consciousness that witnesses all experience without being defined by any of it. And from this recognition, everything becomes possible. Not because your circumstances change, but because your relationship to them transforms. You are no longer a victim of your thoughts and emotions. You are the awareness that contains them. You are no longer at war with parts of yourself. You are the wholeness that includes all parts. This is the return. Not to somewhere new, but to what has always been. Not to a future state of enlightenment, but to the present moment, where you have always been, where everything you've been seeking has been waiting for you to notice it. The breath moves through you. The heart beats in your chest. Sensations arise and dissolve. And through it all, there is this presence, awareness, the unchanging witness of all that changes. You are here. You have always been here. And you are home.